This is World Awakenings, the fast track to enlightenment with your host, Carl Gruber. World Awakenings is a podcast dedicated to opening your mind, your heart, and your eyes to the fact that the world's population is now, more than ever, awakening to all things spiritual, metaphysical, and enlightening, and just how they play an all-important role in our daily life. So join Carl on this enlightening experience as he interviews metaphysical and spiritual experts to discuss, debate, and delve deeply into the hows and whys of this worldwide awakening.
Awakenings is super excited to add this new feature to each show as we welcome Dr. Glenn Schwart Wout, known as the Wizard of Wellness, to answer any and all health-related questions and his suggestion on how to heal it in a natural and healthy manner. Now, one serious physical problem that is unfortunately much too prevalent in humans is something called rheumatoid arthritis. This problem can really limit a person's physical movement and more. Now, what natural treatment is the best one for this?
I've formulated a specific, what I call functional formulation, botanical nutritional combination of the key ingredients that we know from the scientific literature have a beneficial effect. And I call that comfort. That's a simple name to remember. But there's so much more than that to arthritis and rheumatoid arthritis. So I'd like to talk about some other things. That would be certainly the first thing I think of. And so let's see how, if you feel better with comfort. And it is truly healing because it's natural ingredients that are supporting the body to heal itself, which is what inflammation is. It's the immune system trying to cleanse and repair that tissue. So if we take anti-inflammatory drugs, they're stopping the process of cleansing and repair, and we feel better temporarily, but it actually makes the condition worse. It's adding another cause of disease. Drugs kill hundreds of thousands of people every year, and they're the underlying cause of most of the chronic degenerative disease that we have. So the more you can find healthy, alternative, natural solutions, the better. So I'm going to talk about a couple others that I think are really important to know about. A couple remedies would be one called immune modulation. Immune modulation is the technical term for mostly natural products that are known to strengthen the immunity against infection while at the same time reducing inflammation in autoimmune conditions and also in allergy, hyperimmune conditions, and at the same time just making the immune system more effective at cleansing the tissue. So it's getting the job done better, easier, faster, moving you toward health to relieve the symptoms rather than pushing you back into chronic degenerative disease to temporarily relieve the symptoms. Just a simple example that I've come across in the research to illustrate what's happening in headaches with aspirin. We all know that's going to reduce the headache, right? But the studies show that it increases future headaches. So it's only putting off the cleansing process that's a valuable process to your body to maintaining health, longevity, lifespan, health span. So you're actually reducing your overall health. In fact, it also shows you increase the risk of blindness from bleeding eye disease and other bleeding diseases in the body. So we want to look for a better solution. Like even the origin of aspirin was willow bark, but if you have willow bark extract for your salicylic content, it's going to be green in color. It's going to have bioflavonoids that are some of those, or polyphenols, we call them, another term in chemistry, that are among those immune modulators. It's going to help balance the effect of that chemical effect of the aspirin. And one more thing that's so helpful for people is a soft laser, an infrared and red light therapy. It's called photobiomodulation, the fancy word, but for light therapy. These particular frequencies of light, and this is a soft laser, so you don't do it in the open eyes, but it can be on the eye if the eye is closed, or on the joints in this case, and very, very cleansing and rejuvenating. You do it every other day, so there's time to finish the cleansing process and also the repair, the regenerative process that happens after each therapy. We use also a special frequency that we oscillate the light at that I found in my research actually attracts the spirit minerals, the minerals of the ghost in the machine, the body that's immortal, the part that's sentient, that has consciousness. And those are super conductive, they're super fluid, they have tremendous healing properties. They can move heavy metals out of the way, they can reconnect where energy is disconnected, which is what pain is in Oriental medicine. It's blocked energy. So the Harmony laser, definitely want to give that a shot. It's amazing.
If you have that issue, take a listen to what Dr. Glenn said. So we hope you enjoy this feature on natural and healthy treatments and healing with the Wizard of Wellness, Dr. Glenn Schwart Wout. Now, if you have a health issue you would like to ask Dr. Glenn, email them to me at kwgruber@yahoo.com. kwgruber@yahoo.com, and we will feature your question on an upcoming show. Also, if you would like to purchase any of Dr. Glenn's natural remedies, go to his website, remedymatch.com, and put in this code for 10% off, AWAKE, all capital letters, AWAKE, to receive the World Awakenings discount, and also a free wicking toothbrush set. Welcome once again, my beautiful friends, to the show World Awakenings, the fast track to enlightenment. I'm your host, Carl Gruber. Now, those of you who have followed this show since I started it in June 2018 know that the core mission of this show is following and learning about true spiritual awakening, especially following the beautiful non-dualistic teachings of the Modern Spiritual Guide, A Course in Miracles. And yes, we do explore metaphysical topics, and we have had numerous channels, mediums, and even self-help gurus on this show, but we always come back to that question: why now? More than ever are the people of the world awakening to all things spiritual, metaphysical, and enlightening. And this show returns us to our main spiritual seeking mission with today's guest. Join me now as we meet him. So with today's 205th episode, we are incredibly honored to meet and speak with Richard Smoley. Richard is a literary expert who has published and written widely on the topics of spirituality, A Course in Miracles, Gnosticism, the supernatural, the prophet Nostradamus, consciousness, religious traditions, and even the occult. He is a graduate of Harvard with a master's degree from Oxford, and he has been the editor of numerous academic newspapers and magazines, and he's the author of many, many books exploring the topics we just mentioned, including A Theology of Love, Reimagining of Christianity through A Course in Miracles. So, wow, with that, Richard, I hope I got everything right on that, but wow, you have a great resume. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I'm very honored by your introduction, and I very much look forward to our conversation.
Well, yeah, we've got a lot to talk about because you know what you do just absolutely fascinates me, who has been a long time A Course in Miracles student and a spiritual seeker. But let's go back to the beginning for you as a young Richard Smoley. You obviously were a great student as you graduated from both Harvard and Oxford, and you were drawn to writing and literature. Where did that influence come from in your life?
You mean writing and literature?
Yes.
I knew I wanted to be a writer from around the age of 10. I did some little, sketches and whatnot. I tried to write. In fact, I wrote a kind of a Shavian, as in Bernard Shaw, parlor comedy when I was in the 8th grade. I don't have it anymore. And I wrote a couple of screenplays when I was in high school. And I even took a screenwriting course during my last year at Harvard. And I wrote a screenplay about Rasputin, which subject I've revisited a number of times because I certainly find him to be a fascinating character. And he has been explored in film more than once, well or badly. So it's really been there all a long time. My degrees are in classics, Latin and Greek, and I majored in those because I really felt that knowing those languages were the best possible training for becoming a writer. And I still believe that. And I do not regret 1 second having majored in Latin and Greek and philosophy. Whether no matter who says those are useless degrees or not, they were certainly not useless to me.
Well, that's interesting too, because when in high school and in college, I studied German. And when I got to Ohio State University, excuse me, where I graduated from, I took a German course, and I had a great teacher because he took it back to the Latin roots, and he could show us how it related, to all languages, not just to German or English. So I understand where you're coming from with that. But and one other thing I'm real curious about, were your parents super educated too? Was that a real big influence for you?
Well, my mother was basically a housewife with a high school education. My father went to college after the Second World War on the GI Bill. He was in the Navy for 20 years, and he went to the University of Connecticut. More to the point, I think he in particular was always a seeker. And, when he was in the Navy for 20 years and he was in the Orient for a lot of that, he said he saw a lot of things he just couldn't quite understand from normal approach. And so he had a lot of spiritual and metaphysical literature in the house, and he read it a lot. And, there wasn't that much. I was growing up right in the 60s, so there wasn't as much out there then as there is now. But, we had quite a bit of it, and I read it, and I was influenced by it. So I always had a taste for that. Toward the end of my time at Harvard, there was a mystical bookshop in Harvard Square, which of course is long gone, a New Age bookshop. And I started to go there, and I started to buy some of the books there. So that was kind of a beginning point of my, shall we say, mature interest.
Well, that's interesting because I was just about to ask you where your interest in religions and spirituality came from, and obviously it came from your dad being around your father.
Yeah, that's the, my mother was also sympathetic to these ideas, and she was extremely intuitive, but she didn't particularly read a lot, but they were both very kind of aware of the spiritual and respectful of it. So that was certainly those were certainly a great influence for me.
Well, and obviously, I mentioned you've got a number of beautiful books you've written, and we're going to talk about those in a little bit. But I'm just curious, what attracted you to A Course in Miracles in the first place? I mean, how did it come into your life?
When I finished Oxford in 1980, I moved with my girlfriend to San Francisco city, which I knew very, very little about. I'm from Connecticut originally. And while I was getting on the plane, I decided to buy a copy of Psychology Today to read. And this was September 1980. And Psychology Today contained an article called The Gospel According to Helen, which was about A Course in Miracles. It was, half respectful, half disdainful. And I thought it was kind of interesting. I didn't think much more about it. But a few months later, I was in a San Francisco used bookshop, and came across, a used set of the course. And I bought it, almost as a curiosity. I took it home, and I read about 20 pages of the text, which didn't really gel for me. But they had these little daily lessons, which seemed easy enough to do in the workbook. So I started doing the lessons. And, I did the lessons for the next year. About 6 months into it, I was curious to see who else was interested in this stuff. So I called the Foundation for Inner Peace, which told me about a miracles group that was meeting in San Francisco at the time. So I started with that group, and I stayed with them for several years. And since then, the course has been a major part of my life. I have studied other traditions, including like the Kabbalah, Tibetan Buddhism, Gurdjieff work, and so on, Theosophy. But, of course, has certainly been a very, very central part of my search.
Yeah, and how apropos that you should move to San Francisco and the Foundation for Inner Peace. The publishers of the ACIM are based right in the Bay Area too.
Yeah, in those days they were in Tiburon, which is a very stylish suburb of Marin that's just across the bay from San Francisco. I even went to a couple of meetings at the Tiburon Congregational Church, which was kind of their local meeting place. And Bill Thetford, one of the scribes of Course in Miracles, was there. So I met him a couple of times. He was extrememely nice, extraordinarily unassuming man. He didn't even run the group. Somebody else was running it. So, so I had that connection. There was another occasion, and I don't know to what extent it lasted, but I was also part of a miracles group that went into San Quentin prison. And this was in 1983. And I went a few times. It was very interesting. There's a part of San Quentin called the Ranch, which is its lowest security prison. It's for, unusually well-behaved inmates and inmates who are about the end of their sentence, so they're going to get out anyway. So they have to have some kind of, adjustment buffer. So I went to that for a number of meetings. I don't know how long it lasted, but it was certainly very good work. And I was pleased to see how receptive they were to it.
Very, very interesting. One thing, you have a lifetime of research and writing about religions and spirituality. I'm curious, how does A Course in Miracles and its teachings fit in with what all organized religions have taught throughout all of human history, or does it not fit in?
Well, it certainly has lots of resemblances and echoes and similarities to just about any spiritual tradition that you'd want to name. But let me focus on Christianity. And one reason I wrote A Theology of Love is that A Course in Miracles, among its other merits, is really the only coherent and intelligible Christian theology that has ever been done. All the others make almost no sense. And this is papered over by, well, it's just something you have to believe on faith or something like that. I mean, think about the literal understanding of Christianity, mainstream Christianity. God got mad at the human race 6,000 years ago for eating a piece of fruit in Armenia. He got so mad that he not only threw them out of this paradise, but condemned them and all of their descendants to eternal damnation. But then he kind of felt bad about it after a couple of thousand years, and he sent part of himself down and managed to get it tortured to death. And somehow that made it all right, except not really, because unless you believe this ridiculous story, you're still going to go to hell. What part of that actually makes sense? Does any of that make sense? No. Someone from conventional Christianity might object to that, but they would object to what I'm saying only in terms of tone and style and not in terms of content. And by the way, this rather irritable, capricious God is infinitely loving and could never do anything harm. So does that make any sense? No. But as you know, the theology of the Course does make sense. It's not that we were expelled from the Garden of Eden, but as the Course says, we had this kind of, tiny, mad idea that we could be separate from God. And this idea was so frightening that it freaked us, collectively known as the Son of God, out and plunged us into this world generated by the ego, which is a world of fear and hatred and insanity. And the only way out of this is, step one, to realize this, and B, to step out of this nightmare of fear and hatred, and that's done through love and forgiveness. Step number one of which is to realize that God is not mad at us for having done anything. It's all our own deluded imagination, with which we use to torture ourselves and others.
Yeah, wow, what an explanation. And it really explains what the Course says, that the world as we know it, the religions or the way we live life, is completely upside down from the reality and the truth of all that is in our unity with our source.
Mm-hmm. Very true, very true. And, I mean, this is why, even to bring this up outside of, say a circle like this is very threatening. And people respond in a very threatened way because it does threaten their worldview. It does threaten the way they see things, and it should, because I think one point the Course makes is that the ego, which is totally delusory, frames a delusory world around it. And what I take this to mean is that there's a part of our mind which we can call the ego, or we can call something like the world generator. There's something that takes all our sense impressions in and organizes it into a world. That is the world that we move around in and function in. Unfortunately, this part of the mind that does this organizing is completely insane. And as a result, why is the world so crazy? Well, I think what I just said is a fairly good explanation. And then how do you kind of realize that this crazy, mental world generator is not you? And how do you step out from under its influence? And that's kind of the question. I think that's the task.
Yeah, what a beautiful explanation of that, and thank you for that. I'm just going to go back. I remember you said when you first read the Course, you read about 20 pages, and it just didn't really align with you at that time. And I've had ACIM teacher and author Gary Renard on the show 3 or 4 times, and I've got to meet Gary and hang out with him and his wife at a workshop. The first time I met Gary was back in 2007. He was doing a workshop in Cincinnati, and I went there, and I went up to get my book, his Disappearance of the Universe book, autographed. And I was talking to Gary, and I said, well, I don't know about for you, Gary. I sure didn't quite understand it when I first started reading it. And he said, here's one of the greatest teachers of A Course in Miracles, or well-known ones. And he says, yeah, when I first read it, I said, what the hell is this? This is Gary Renard telling me. But here's a question I'm really curious about. Can you explain, because the Course is what they call a non-dualistic spiritual teaching. Can you explain exactly what the term non-dualism means, and how does it apply or not apply to the religions of the world?
Well, that's a good question, because non-dualism is used in all sorts of ways as a term, not all of which make any real sense. I mean, if you look at the word itself, it's contradictory, because there's this thing called dualism, whatever that is, and there's this thing called non-dualism. So you still have two things, so you still have dualism. So, what does that even mean?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times it's very unclear, sometimes even of the people who claim to be non-dualistic.
Mm-hmm.
To get really technical about it, the whole idea comes out of Hinduism. And one strain of the Hindu tradition is Vedanta,
Mm-hmm.
one of the many perspectives of Hinduism. And there is Dvaita Vedanta, and Dvaita, which means dualistic, kind of posits a personal God, and they call Ishvara. There's the Atman, the true self, capital S self. There's Ishvara, God, and beyond that is Brahman, kind of the ultimate source. That is Dvaita. Then there's another one called there's a Vashista Advaita, which is kind of someplace in between, and then Advaita Vedanta, it says Atman is, that is yourself, is Brahman, and this world is illusory. So that is one respect. To say that the world is illusory is one respect in which the Course resembles a non-dualistic teaching such as Vedanta. I mean, dualism is used in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it means, and Christianity in its conventional form is sometimes considered semi-dualistic, because a really dualistic religion, there are two powers, the good and the evil, the light and the dark. And they're kind of never going to be reconciled. Your task as this is true of Zoroastrian, your task is to kind of, shall we say, sort out the light from the darkness. So there's no unification, at least not that anyone ever really talks about. Whereas, many religions posit that, everything does arise from a certain unity, which is God, and we all arise from it or are created by it. That's another way of looking at it. And then, of course, then you come up with a problem of evil, which religions answer in many different ways, usually poorly. The Course has its own answer to evil. Evil is something we ourselves imagined, and the mistaken idea that we could ever be separated from God, or that God could be mad at us. So that's where evil is. We created it, or let me put it this way, to use the Course language, we made it.
Yeah, wow. Really, you're pointing out some very, very important things here. I mean, our world is a dualistic world, and I think that's one of the very hard things for first-time students to grab on. That's why I asked the question, to grab on this understanding of non-dualism. There is no this end of the stick and this end of the stick. It's just all that is. So, well, I'm going to shift gears a little bit here. We're going to talk about a couple of your books here, but I'm curious about this, and you wrote a book called Forbidden Faith, The Gnostic Legacy. Now, I know Gary Renard, that's a big thing, is that he understands from his teachers, Art and Persa, that he actually was St. Thomas, and the Gnostic Gospels were written by St. Thomas. So, I mean, I don't know a ton about the Gnostics, if you might be able to touch on that.
Okay, well, that's a deep subject. The Gospel of Thomas is a very short text. It's only about 11 pages long, and it's a sayings collection, a collection of Jesus's sayings. It was lost for a long, long time. It was only rediscovered in 1945. And many of the things that Jesus says in it, many of them are exactly like the ones in the canonical Gospels, but there are things that point to a more Gnostic, that is to say, more mystical approach to Jesus. And here, Jesus, there's nothing said about the crucifixion, about the resurrection. It's all just a list of Jesus's sayings. Now, this is interesting because even before it was discovered, scholars believed that there were, the first writings about Jesus were sayings collections. And that the authors of the New Testament, the Gospels in the New Testament, use these sayings collections. Now, no one is saying that they used Thomas for lots of complex reasons, but Thomas actually has the form of what scholars have posited as the earliest stratum of the Gospels, which could lead one to think, and I do think, that it's very ancient. It could go back to like AD 50, whereas the Gospels in the New Testament are conventionally said to have been written between AD 70 and 100. So it could be older than those. Now, scholars are reluctant to admit this because they see Gnosticism only evolving in its first full form in the 2nd century. But if this Thomas is old, that this strain of Gnostic Christianity would go back to Jesus himself. And it suggests that Jesus might not have told everything to all of his own disciples, which would make sense because each student always has a particular level of understanding, and a really good teacher knows what that is and speaks to it. So he may have spoken rather, we would almost think of orthodox terms to some of his disciples, and he might have spoken in much more mystical, illuminative terms to others. Now, the people who want to take that conventional orthodox view at face value are very threatened by this mystical perspective. And the Gnostics were bitterly opposed by what was beginning to call itself the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church won over and became the official religion of the Roman Empire in, 395. And all other religions were pretty much to be stomped out, including paganism, including Gnosticism, and whatever else there was around. But there's this sense that what is the fundamental meaning of Gnosticism? That salvation is not, kind of being saved from sin. It's not a matter of faith or works. It's a certain kind of illuminative knowledge that, to go back to what we were saying before, is kind of an intuitive understanding of where we are really, that this is kind of a delusory world, and just kind of waking up to that fact is a big step kind of in the direction toward knowledge.
And I totally agree with you. Gnosticism is a deep subject, so we're just like glossing over it, but thank you for that. Now, I think a really, really important book you wrote, and I want to address that. One of the main teachings of A Course in Miracles, as you know, is that of forgiveness. And you even wrote a book titled The Deal, A Guide to Radical and Complete Forgiveness. What's so radical about forgiveness the way the Course teaches it?
Well, the way I phrased it in the book, and for various reasons, I did not use or refer to Course in the book, because in a book that was meant to be that basic, I did not want to bring in the concept of the world as illusion, because that's too much for most people, and they're not going to want to do it. And it just makes no sense to them. The deal is you forgive everything and you'll be forgiven everything. And it's pretty much it's an all or nothing thing. If you forgive everyone everything, you'll be forgiven everything. If you forgive everyone except that one person, the whole deal falls apart. And all of the guilt that you feel, that you project onto everybody else, and you have in yourself, all comes rushing back. So everybody, and it's a little step-by-step process, simply forgiven. And we basically do that. I think it has been extremely powerful for me, and other people have said it's been powerful for them. The point is, there are no exceptions. And where did this come from? Well, it's inspired in a way by a verse in the Lord's Prayer: forgive us our debts as we have forgiven our debtors. Now, the way I just translated it is not the way it's usually translated, but what I'm translating it in the correct way. Forgive us our debts as we have forgiven. That is a verb in the past in the original Greek. So you kind of forgive first. It's not just like some kind of barter. You wipe the slate clean for everyone, all of your debtors, everybody who owes something to you, and that may include what are perceived as sins, trespasses, or even possibly literal debts. Sometimes the very trivial kind. Some people are mad at old friends of ours because they failed to send them a Christmas card. From their point of view, that person owed them a Christmas card. That's a debt. And their failure to send this Christmas card is a debt that they can't forgive. And you know perfectly well that this happens all the time. So the whole thing is you've cut through all that. You know, I accept total forgiveness. I forgive everybody, everything. And that makes it very simple. And in a way, I would even go on to say, maybe it even makes it easy.
And my understanding is that if you, as we say, radically forgive everybody and everything, you're actually forgiving yourself. And thus, as the Course uses the undoing of everything we've learned, or an atonement of that erases your deep sense of guilt from the separation, the tiny mad idea.
That's quite right. And that's another implication of what I was saying.
Yeah, it is important, and I think, boy, now the more than ever, the world needs to grab onto some radical forgiveness. But as we move on here, again, talking about your writing, you speak and write about the occult, and you've even written a book about the prophet Nostradamus and his predictions. Can you tell us more about this book and why you chose to write it?
Well, there are two books. One is called Introduction to the Occult, which is a very basic guide to some of these ideas. The Nostradamus book, I mean, I'm going to be utterly frank with you. I wrote it because an editor friend asked me to write it and I needed money. More books get written this way than one might imagine. But I took the project seriously and I looked through, I picked out the most best known, the most important prophecies of Nostradamus. I translated them from the French literally, more or less literally, and tried to explicate them. Nostradamus wrote in a very, very peculiar style. They were 4-line verses called quatrains, and they are very, very cryptic. They are broken in grammar. You know, so if someone translates, gives you a translation of a Nostradamus quatrain that's grammatically correct and makes sense, that's not a correct translation, because they're broken and jagged and fragmentary, even in the original. I tried to do justice to that. In the end, I ended up as pretty much a skeptic about Nostradamus. You know, I'm maybe one of very few writers. I didn't try to set out to expose him, but I'm saying, I don't know. I just don't think, I'm just not seeing a lot here. I can see a lot that you can read into it. And people have read a lot into it. And these things are so obscure. But they're haunting and powerful. And I think to be Nostradamus legitimately, I think you could say he's a great surrealist poet in an age when nobody had thought of surrealism in any sort of way. So the verses are very powerful. They do touch you very deeply. Someone might say that they apply to a lot of different historical situations. And some of them certainly do. Others are pretty cryptic. Some, so far as anyone is able to understand them, simply didn't come true. But he's certainly an interesting figure, and he certainly casts his own aura even over this time. I mean, I'm the only author of Nostradamus books that said this, which is this. Well, you want to write a book about Nostradamus, take some of his quatrains and just say, about how they're going to come true in the next 10 years, which none of them will. But that's okay, because 10 years later, or even 5 years later, everybody will have forgotten that. You've already published a book on Nostradamus, so you're a Nostradamus expert, so you can write another book like that. about the next 5 years. I mean, you can, pretty much turn it into a lifelong career, and some people have. I mean, I don't know how many Nostradamus. If you really want to look into Nostradamus, go to a used bookshop and look at a volume about him from, say, 1990, and what was supposed to happen between 1990 and now, and see how much of it actually did happen, according to these authors. So, yeah, I'm basically fundamentally skeptical about Nostradamus. I mean, he did what he did. Prophets are usually very obscure. They do best when their prophecies could be read in many other ways. So, in a way, it can sound, whatever happens, it could sound like they came true.
Is it possible that prophets like Nostradamus, the ego uses them with these predictions to help mankind focus on the dualistic world and bodies and happenings within humanity to distract them from the truth of the unity of all that is?
Yes, yes. Of course, the minute you say that, you start finding that this applies to pretty much prophets of all types.
Yeah.
Including the ones in the Bible, a lot of whose prophecies never came true. I mean, one famous example is in Ezekiel 26, when it says that the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar shall surely conquer the city of Tyre. And Ezekiel 29, it says, well, he didn't exactly kind of conquer the city of Tyre, but he tried real hard. So I, God, am going to let him conquer Egypt, which he did or did partially. So, I mean, the prophecies themselves, even in the context of the Bible, are often not true, much less all of the times of the end and other things that occupy people's attention so much. I can go into that if you like. Why is this end time prophecy so appealing? And it's not just in our time, but it's certainly been the case, at least throughout the history of Christianity, when just about every generation believed that this was really it. This was the time of the end. Now, when Western civilization kind of as a whole lost faith in Christianity, it lost faith in this kind of apocalypse, but the fear remained. And the fear now has been secularized. Since the Second World War, is secularized by fear of nuclear annihilation, and now by environmental catastrophe. And both of those are serious concerns. But notice how the apocalyptic mindset takes over whenever people start thinking or talk about these things. And that's a relic of that conventional Christianity with its doom saturated thinking. Now, to go even a little further into it, what is the appeal of this idea? Well, my belief is that it comes from a deep-seated knowledge that your world is going to come to an end in a few decades. So is mine. So is that of everyone listening to this podcast, everyone on this planet. Your world is going to end, maybe tomorrow, maybe 60 years from now, but your world is going to end. And this is profoundly disturbing. People do not like to think about death, and they really do not like to think about their own deaths. So this fear is projected, to use a coarse term, onto this fairly improbable idea of Jesus coming down over the skies of Dallas and so on. So, and it's kind of not really true. So you're, in a sense, you're displacing this fear. So it's a little further off, whereas the sense that no, you're going to be physically dead in a comparatively or really short time is just too much. Oh, and the other thing is, no, people are afraid of dying alone. That's almost as big a fear as dying, period. So the idea that we'll all go together when we go is, in its bizarre way, comforting. So I think all of this feeds into this, and it's still going on. It's still going on. It's taking different forms. That doesn't mean that the environmental crisis is not a very serious one and needs to be addressed as thoroughly as possible. But that's different from apocalypse.
I think the key word you said, speaking of the end of times and the popularity of it, is the word fear that you said. And the ego wants that fear to be spread because it thrives off it. It keeps humanity in a state of fear and it grows stronger. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why the end of times is so popular, throughout all ages, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I do this myself sometimes. It'd be interesting to observe yourself and just throughout any ordinary day and see how attractive fear is.
Yeah.
And whether this is about, your financial future, your health, the world, the United States. There's almost something magnetic about it. And, you can see it particularly today with so much political uncertainty that, people's egos are, kind of drawn to it. And this drawing to it, of course, increases the projection, which makes the whole situation seem worse, which means on and on and on. And the only way to break through that, as the Course says, is through love and forgiveness. But, the world is willing to try every remedy except the one that actually works.
Yeah, love. That's awesome. One thing I'm really curious about, what are your thoughts on the current state here in 2025 of the religions of the world right now? It would seem most of them are really caught up in the ego's dualistic line of thinking. I mean, is is there even hope for organized religions? Maybe that hope is the A Course in Miracles.
Well, I think so, and that's why I wrote a Theology of Love, because it is a reasonable theology. It does make sense once you understand it. Of course, you have to understand it intuitively as well as conceptually, because the old, as I said earlier, the conventional Christianity, it makes no sense. I mean, stated baldly, it's just a joke. And I think more and more people are coming to realize that just doesn't have a future. And to talk like demographically, about a quarter of the population is Catholic in the United States. And this has stayed pretty even because a lot of Catholics have left the church, but Hispanic immigration is pretty much made up for that. There's another 20 to 25% who are evangelical fundamentalists, many of them in the South. So that's another 50%. Now, for a long time, the liberal mainstream, more or less liberal mainstream Protestant denominations made up most of the rest. I'm talking about the Episcopalians, Presbyterians, United Church of Christ, the Methodists, some of the more moderate Baptists. These churches have been hollowed out. And the people, if you look just at demographics, the percentage of people that used to adhere to these religions are now, well, some of them are still there, and the rest of them are non-affiliated. Some of them spiritual but not religious, some of them neither spiritual nor religious. And I think that's because the mainstream Protestant denominations, as instructed in the mainstream theology and divinity schools, they've already figured out that this stuff really doesn't make any sense. And they know that, but they can't exactly admit it, because then they would have to supply something in its place, which it can't do. I have a friend who is a Methodist minister in Dallas. He actually married my wife and me. And I said, you know all this stuff. Do you ever tell your congregation about it? He said, No. So do I. I chickened out.
Wow.
He was a hell of a lot more honest about it than many clergy are. Of course, people can tell this. So, we might as well stay home and drink coffee and read the paper on Sunday mornings. So Christianity's been taken over, now the mainstream Protestants Catholicism in its many forms and fundamentalism are starting to occupy a large portion, not necessarily the population, but of people who consider themselves believing Christians. I think this is ultimately a dead end. And there'll be a lot more disillusion with it. I mean, Catholics go all over the place. I mean, Catholics, there are a billion Catholics in the world, so you could say anything about Catholics and it will be true of someone. But I think a lot of practicing Catholics, sincere practicing Catholics, well, they like the Mass, they like the structure of the Mass, they like the structure of the church community, and the rest, well, they don't think too much about it. I actually, this is interesting. If you look at polls, just ordinary standard polls, and this seems to have been true for several decades now, someplace between 20 and 25% of the United States population believe in reincarnation. And in some of those polls, a greater percentage of Catholics believe in reincarnation than everybody else, even though the Catholic Church has always repudiated reincarnation. So you can see, people sometimes complain about supermarket spirituality. Remember that? Ever hear that?
Yeah,
Pick and
kind of
choose.
casually, yeah.
This pick and choose. You can pick whatever you want. Well, this is, I think, this is made fun of and criticized, but I think it's your obligation. I think you have not only the right, but the obligation to yourself to say, yeah, I believe this. This makes sense to me. This does not. And if that kind of overlaps with the dogmas of a particular church or not, well, that's that church's problem.
Well, just absolutely a wonderful, wonderful conversation. We are speaking with Richard Smoley, an incredible author and teacher of, would you call it, you're an author, teacher of spirituality and religions? Do you like that description?
Really describe myself as pretty much of anything. I mean, I think I'm an author, a writer, but I'm not a clergyman. I don't profess to be a teacher in any formal sense. I did teach philosophy at a community college for a few years some time back. So in that respect, I guess I was more literally a teacher. But I just kind of say what I have to say, and I think people can, will, and should take it to the extent that it makes sense to them.
And of course, much of what we were talking here is about A Course in Miracles. I'd like to go back to your studies of the ACIM. What personal changes have you seen and experienced in yourself since you started studying and reading the course?
Well, in a certain respect, that's impossible to say because I started studying the course in 1981, which is now almost 45 years ago, meaning that I changed so much anyway. It's hard to say how much of it can be directly attributed to the course. But I think one thing, like a certain kind of severity, judgmental aspect of my own character has been considerably softened. I certainly feel greater personal peace than I did. I am willing to forgive, and I do attempt to forgive to the extent possible, in day-to-day life. And yeah, I think by and large, it's greatly increased my sense of contentment and fulfillment in life.
And I agree with you. Since I've studied the course since 2004, my practicing of forgiveness and non-judgment, and that is the biggest change in me. Practicing those things, I have a greater sense of peace. I just read the other day in a course, it says, to have peace, teach peace to learn it,
Mhm.
which I love. I love that.
Yeah. Well, again, you know, and to use another lesson, all that I give is given to myself, and if all you have to give is fear and judgment and persecution, well, that's what you're giving to yourself. And to the extent that you can let that go, release it, and replace it with love, compassion, joy, um, well, you're giving that to yourself too. And I'm entirely convinced that, if you keep on that way, you will experience it. Sometimes immediately, sometimes fairly soon, sometimes down the road a little.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful stuff. Well, Richard Smoley, what a blessing to have you on the show. I love your extensive knowledge, and I think it's a big help to all of us to sit down and contemplate these things. Now, I know you have a beautiful website. I believe it's richardsmoley.com. I'll put that link in there. Is that the best way for people to find out more about you and perhaps connect with you?
Yeah, I do have an email address connected with that, so that would probably be the best way. I also I'm also editor of Quest, which is the Journal of the Theosophical Society in America. So I could also be contacted through the Theosophical Society, which is based in Wheaton, Illinois, very close to where I live.
Very awesome. So, and of course, I will put links in the show notes to Richard's website and to a number of his books. And I really encourage people to check those out, and very worth it. So, Richard, thank you. Thank you for blessing us and being here on World Awakenings. Awakenings. Beautiful conversation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and I hope what I say is some value to somebody. Let me just say one last thing. I think it's important. There is a thing in the teacher's manual that says there's one thought that should be remembered throughout the day. It's a thought of limitless release, of limitless joy, because all things are released within it. And I think that's an excellent daily, even hourly practice. I mean, if you're doing the workbook, do the workbook, but I think that's an excellent hourly practice as a way of recentering yourself. But thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, Carl. I really enjoyed our time together, and I hope our paths will cross soon.
This has been another episode of World Awakenings, the fast track to enlightenment with host Carl Gruber, a certified Law of Attraction life coach. We welcome you to tune in to each and every episode of World Awakenings as we open your mind, your heart, and your eyes to the fact that the world's population is now, more than ever, awakening to the truth of all things spiritual, metaphysical, and enlightening, and just how much they play an all-important role in our moment-to-moment daily life. Much love and light to you, my friend, and thank you for tuning into World Awakenings.